I was going to say that part of the inspiration for running for city council came out of Artists Dismantling Capitalism.
Yeah.
So, I look forward to working with you all on your campaigns in the future. If that's what you want to do. And
everybody fits in where they fit.
I mean, and I think the thing about this symposium that excites me is really working with people to look at sort of the ground in which we stand and where are the possibilities from here. What are the possibilities? What are the things on the periphery that we may not have seen or may not be seeing that are already happening that can open up a space for more sharing, collaborative economy and also society. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. And just as a reminder for everybody, we have eval forms in every room so you guys can evaluate the different workshops that you go to. I know we have some sign-up sheets up front if you guys would like to stay in the loop. And we also have donation jars at each one because these things do cost money and we like to keep it going. So if you are able to and willing, that's awesome.
Inspired. But
inspired, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, but this conference is free.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of housekeeping things? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to do first was to thank our sponsors for this. Cooperation Humboldt is the grounding sponsor, Synapses, and Society for Poetic Action are also sponsors. And then I also want to really give deep thanks to the facilities here, to Jackie and David from the Arcata Playhouse for letting us use this space, for Shoshana over at Redwood Racks letting us use her space, and Marissa at it's MK Studios.
Yeah.
And logistically, there are some workshops that are here in this space. The first workshop will be the deep dive that David will be leading. Will be here, and then we'll do breakouts. The Redwood Racks, you can go back through here, through the exit, and take a left and take the driveway, if you'd like, and go right into Redwood Racks, and that's the driveway. You can also go around the building, and there's the little courtyard on this side over here. MK Studios is right at the end of the courtyard, and so is the Redwood Racks entrance there. So two ways to get there. Yeah. There is also tea and coffee. It is free. There's a donation jar if you would like to help support us. There, restrooms are to the left over here, and there are also restrooms on the other side of the building in the Redwood Rack studio.
And if you guys have any questions or anything throughout the day, you can approach any of us up here. David Cobb also, would you stand up please? Just so everyone know. But this guy, he deserves it.
Yeah,
he's glad you can find him.
Glad you can find her.
And Caroline too.
And Caroline.
You got it. You're one of the organizers too.
That's right. Thanks, Miss Caroline. We have organized a lunch for you today, which is also free.
And Greg, Caroline, Ruthie, myself, we all made food. There's lots of food. So if you have friends who even aren't here now and want to come eat lunch with us, there's free lunch at noon. It's going to be a smorgasbord of soups and soupy things.
Yeah, and if you have friends that aren't here, text them now and tell them what great workshops they can make.
Also, some folks got together and made this thematic zine called Peace, Justice, and a Good Biscuit. There's lots of biscuit references and also references to dismantling capitalism throughout the zine. I recommend it.
I love a good biscuit reference.
A good biscuit.
A good biscuit.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. Anything else? I think we should hand it
We're
out.
on time, so.
We're ready to hand it out for the big picture?
Yeah. So I would like to introduce our first session, which is the big picture with David Cobb.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all. So glad that you are here. And I'm going to actually pick up with one of the comments that Leslie made. The whole point of this is to really ground us, or where we stand. And I want to start by acknowledging that where we stand is traditional Wiyot territory. And that really is an entree into this session because we are on traditional Wiyot territory because I am a settler colonialist and the descendant of. And I don't say that out of shame. I say that out of objective reality. Everybody comes from someplace. And as some of you know me, I will occasionally say, I have a particular hatred for the English Empire because I know I descend from both Scots and Irish. Not one, but two people who were displaced by the English Empire. And as I often say, I love the English people, but I hate the English Empire. And so this is really the starting point for my effort to do a big picture grounding. And as you'll notice, what I have is 4 concepts, all part of an interconnected, interlocking puzzle. And in one sense, one could say, we could literally start anywhere here and end up having the same conversation. Another way to think about it, though, is the broad scope and sweep of human history itself. And so, the words are patriarchy, imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, all interconnected, all intertwined. And I'm wondering, what do you think interconnects and intertwines those? What is the common denominator that links those 4 concepts? Greed.
Your cosmology.
My cosmology. Lizard.
Domination.
Domination. Resources. Hierarchy. Exploitation. Violence. And of course the answer is yes. All that shit. All of it is an interconnected expression of power over domination, and that power over and domination leads to the greed, the exploitation, the theft of the resources, the hierarchical arrangements that we've described. So it really is an interconnected thing. And one of the things that I say in spaces like this, I am a straight up revolutionary. Yeah, thank you for that. I am a revolutionary, and I say I'm a revolutionary for 2 important reasons. The first one is because it's true. Because I believe that this society is fundamentally racist, it's fundamentally sexist, the economic system is fundamentally based on class oppression, and as if that's not bad enough, and that's all totally bad, right? As if that's not bad enough, the institutions in which we are living and complicit and part of are literally destroying the planet. See, we are in an ecological crisis. It's not coming, it's here. And it's going to get worse every day. And we need to ground ourselves in that sort of reality. And there is not just an ecological crisis, but there's an economic crisis. And the economic crisis is one in which not only is exploitation, oppression, the mechanism by which the economy works, it's literally destroying the planet. And when we get to, here's a question. What if capitalism can't solve this economic crisis? How about this as a follow-up question? What if capitalism is the economic crisis? I mean, I'm just guessing that in this crowd, I might get some love for that idea, right? That literally capitalism is the problem. The point is, the ecological crisis, the economic crisis, those crises are actually driving the political crisis that we're experiencing. The political crisis didn't start. Actually, it is a function of an ecological crisis, which is our objective reality, and the economic crisis. Because anybody know where economics derives? What does the word economics mean? Say it louder. I think I heard somebody say it.
Home.
Home. Literally, all economy means is the study of and management of the home. You know, that helps me a lot as an explicit anti-capitalist to actually recognize I want my home organized. I want the little home that I share with Jonathan and Ruthie. I want that organized. I also want my society organized. And I want my home to be organized around the principles of love and compassion and kindness and beauty. And the problem is that we have an economic system that actually do not value those things, do not center those things, and we have not managed our home in a way that encourages and nurtures those things. So the big picture of the economic crisis is being driven by an ecological and economic crisis. So I'm a revolutionary because I think that we have to restructure society. And the second reason that I say that I'm a revolutionary in public places is because I'm looking for other revolutionaries. I'm inviting you, if this is making sense to you and you feel it in your heart or you think it in your head, but because this society has told you never say that out loud, you'll be laughed at, you'll be ridiculed, you'll be mocked. Nobody will take you seriously if you talk like that. See, if you feel that in your heart, if you think that in your head, I'm encouraging you, don't leave me hanging. Let me know that there are other revolutionaries, that we can work together, and that it's actually possible to restructure society. So that's why I say I'm a revolutionary. And it's also why, when I was tasked with the opportunity, and it's a privilege to give the opportunity for a grounding session like this, I wanted to actually put up all 4 of these interconnected concepts and ideas because they are all, in fact, ultimately based on the exploitation and oppression of other human beings. They are hierarchical. They are about theft of resources. They are about domination. And remember, they're interconnected. Any one of these concepts could be the starting point, but I'm actually going to task myself with thinking about, well, in terms of big human history, because storytellers know every story has to start, right? Every story has a beginning. Nothing comes out of nothing. Everything comes out of something. So in that sense, I'm going to posit, I'm going to assert my belief. I'm not saying it's absolutely objectively true, but my belief that the best place to get started is patriarchy. Why? Because as I look at and understand it, and by the way, Shantae, we do have childcare if y'all want.
I'm sorry, she's just missing her Barbie.
See, that's and I gotta say, whenever I see literally intergenerational spaces, it makes my heart happy. So I'm so glad, So I started patriarchy because, and a big shout out to Rianne Eisler and The Chalice and the Blade, a book that literally changed my worldview. Show of hands, who knows that book? I'm looking around, right? So to me, this was really helpful because when I read Rianne Eisler's seminal book, The Chalice and the Blade, it actually made sense to me because she argues, and I think very persuasively, that actually human beings have been on planet Earth as Homo sapiens for roughly 100 to 150,000 years. And that the entire time that we have lived on planet Earth, yes, there were different expressions, cultures and customs in different ways, but from the very jump of what we would call Homo sapiens, we were indigenous to whatever the ecosystem was. And yes, we traveled around, but pretty slowly, actually. And by the way, humans were not merely hunter-gatherers. We were hunter-gatherer-gardeners, right? Gardeners, not industrial farmers. Gardeners, where we were literally connected to Earth. And a big shout out to my mentor and friend Chris Peters of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Development, who once told me this when I was lamenting about the society that I was part of and had a lot of shame around it. And he said, David, you have to remember, you and every other human being descend from indigenous stock. Your ancestors once lived in proper relationship with the ecosystem in which they were from. And if you do your history, I promise you will find that some dominating culture came along and pushed your people off that land and claimed it for their own. Do the research. That's where I began the process and realized I was Scot and Irish, and in fact, Chris Peters was absolutely right. So all of us descend from indigenous stock, and Chris pushed me a little deeper, and he said this, I know who you are. I know your heart. I know how you are struggling to try to help liberate both yourself, the mindset that you've been brought up in, and trying to help liberate all of society. I have a lot of love for you, David. I know what you're actually struggling with, but what I want to tell you is this. The knowledge that you seek is in your own DNA. Because you descend from that, you actually know this genetically because you are supposed to be living in a sustainable way with other people, sharing both power and decision making. That's your birthright. And it was stolen from you and your ancestors by other imperialists, right? And I think that's really, it was helpful to me and valuable to me because it actually made me not be ashamed of who I am. Like I am who I am. And right now, I don't know what I don't know, right? And as, was it Angela Davis who said, there's a great line, I want to make sure I get it right. Some of you may know it. When you know better, do better.
Maya Angelou.
Who was it?
I think it was Maya Angelou.
I bet it was Maya Angelou. I think you're right. So that's the thing. So the more I know, the better I will do. And I will make mistakes as I go. I'm going to own that right up front. I will make mistakes. And I will try to acknowledge mistakes as I make them and try to do better. The reason I want to start with patriarchy is because Riane Eisler actually helped me to understand, for 90 to 95% of the time that human beings lived on planet Earth, we were actually living in a relationship, a right relationship with Mother Earth herself, that we were not above nature. No, there was not a single cosmology that actually looked at being above nature and dominating over it, but was instead part of it, right? And that this worldview was not merely matriarchal, like it was actually a recognition, and this is the phrase that Riane Eisler helped to popularize, an acknowledgement of and an appreciation of both the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. And of course now, as we are understanding more and more about gender, we would say there are sacred other manifestations as well. And, as I know more, I will do better. But the point is that this idea of domination around, and it's typically been gendered throughout world history, right? Like when I say patriarchy, somebody shout out a definition.
Men ruling.
Men ruling.
Certain men ruling.
Certain men ruling. So what I would say is, the way I look at it, actually patriarchy at its core is just a dominator idea. It is the domination of, and it is ruling over, right? And absolutely in world history, what we have seen is, especially from Jump, that was men ruling over and dominating women. Yes?
Suppression of feminism.
Suppression of the feminine. And in fact, we could do, at Humboldt State University or College of the Redwoods right now, you can spend semesters studying the horror associated with the worldview that's associated with that. But for me, this mindset of the suppression of the sacred feminine and the denigrating of it and the domination of and the overpowering of it, in The Chalice and the Blade, what Riane Eisler said, if it is true, and objectively this is true, human beings didn't live that for 90-95% of the time on planet Earth, I will assert this. It's our birthright to live actually in a different way, that the society in which we're living is actually the one that is pathological, that the problem is systems and structures that are incentivizing the wrong things. Patriarchy, I think, is the starting point because at its core, it is about dominating exploitation and oppression. And by the way, that happened all across the globe as that new way of thinking began to happen. And that's why I'll go to imperialism next, because imperialism at its core is to take that dominator mindset, that suppressive mindset, that putting above and forcing others underneath your feet, and putting it into the context of the physical land. Is this making sense so far? Because to me, once I kind of had, and I continue to learn, I continue to grow, but there is a level at which once I actually had this sort of insight or this paradigm shift, everything started to make sense to me. Because to me, imperialism is when you take that idea and you begin to assert it over land and physical space. And what happened was that literally began to shape the globe as well. And here's the other thing. All imperialism sucks. And it's really important to recognize that sadly, every continent has seen empire, right? Imperialism is not a particular pathology of white people or Europeans. We are currently clearly living in the remnants of both the English Empire and Western Empire, where white supremacy, which we'll get to in just a moment, is reflecting, but make no mistake about it. There were African empires, there were empires in South and Central America, there were empires, different versions, because what we're talking about is a completely different worldview. And so, like when I say I have a particular hatred of the English Empire, I'm sure, the Quixote people could say, boy, I really hate the Mayan Empire, or the Aztec Empire, right? Like any of the indigenous people who had been put under the boots of any empire is terrible. So patriarchy as a way of looking at the world, imperialism as how that actually ends up manifesting in terms of world power and land itself. White supremacy and capitalism, one could easily make arguments about which one comes next. I'm going to actually say capitalism next, because capitalism actually precedes the very concept of whiteness. But they are so interconnected, it's almost impossible to separate them out and talk about them, but you can only say one thing at a time. So I just decided I'm going to take capitalism first, because I think it's important to have a definition. How would somebody define capitalism?
Okay, I'm going to take a moment if you don't mind.
Well, we only have a few, so.
Well, I'm not sure how many people in the room have actually read Wealth of Nations, but there's also On Moral Sentiments, the other book, the book most people don't know about. And you would be maybe surprised to know that Adam Smith spoke about the dangers of everything you're talking about, and that what he, basically writing the Bible of capitalism, wrote about is not what we experience today as capitalism. And so I just want to be clear that there's the capitalism that everybody imagines they understand and know about because we're 3 generations and plus into it, the not really capitalism, and what he was talking about. And I don't know whether capitalism, as he's talking about it, is a good thing or a bad thing, because we've never known it.
So what I would say, what this gentleman is referring to is Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations. Here's a pop quiz. Who said this? Never does the merchant class gather, even for mirth and merriment, but that the conversation becomes an immediate conspiracy against the interests of the working class. Obviously Karl Marx, right?
Probably Adam Smith.
Adam Smith said it in The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. Adam Smith actually understood markets and his notion of the invisible hand. Adam Smith's argument was you actually had to have society, morality, and government actually working to prevent the worst instincts of humans in order to have the beauty of the invisible hand. And my guess is that Reverend Lynn Hubbard might actually touch on this a little bit about the morality associated in his art and spirituality session. But here's the, yes?
I was just going to suggest a word, compassionate commerce instead of...
Sure. So compassionate commerce is a wonderful way to describe it, but I'm going to actually say there is actually a definition of capitalism, right? And if you go to any introductory economic textbook, the core principles of capitalism as a way to manage our home, right, is number 1, where you have property owned by private individuals. So capitalism, as a definitional matter, requires the private ownership of specifically the means of producing the things that we need to survive, right? Like Marxist, anarchists, every ism that I'm aware of actually would recognize, private ownership of this jacket is okay. These are my pants. I own them. Caroline, you cannot have my pants. They are my pants, right? So when we're talking about capitalism and property, see, we've been fooled into believing that you either have to have everything privately owned or nothing privately owned. And that's not true. The difference between personal property, real property, and the mechanisms of the things that we need to survive are all different things. Capitalism says you must privately own everything, including the mechanism, factories, farms, etc., that are producing the things that you live. The second thing that capitalism actually requires is not just private ownership of those things, but secondly, that you commodify everything. Everything becomes a commodity. So when you look at the community forest, you do not see a living, breathing ecosystem with literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, of different species that are inhabiting that place. You see board feet. Literally all you see when you look at the forest is how can we commodify that? That's how the capitalist mindset insists that you look on it. So it's not just commodification, but lastly, the entire premise of capitalism is that you buy and sell those commodities at a profit. And because you must buy and sell those commodities at a profit, you must always grow. In fact, at its core, the ideology of capitalism is unlimited growth. Pop quiz. Can anybody think of anything in nature that has as its ideology unlimited growth?
Cancer.
Cancer! Thank you, Solomon. And I bet I saw a couple of other hands. I bet y'all were going to say cancer too. I'm getting a head nod yes. I'm getting a head nod yes. Here's the thing, folks. We have to come to terms with the fact that the ideology of capitalism, the economic system, how they are saying that we're supposed to order our entire home and our society is cancer. It is going to destroy the planet because here's the thing. Newsflash, the earth is a closed system. And if you have unlimited growth, it will ultimately destroy it. So here's something. Capitalism is going to end. But I don't celebrate that, because one way that it could end is it morphs into fascism and then destroys the planet, and we end up in some Mad Max dystopian future without the cool costumes. Although Jonathan has insisted that, no, he's going to be part of that, and he's going to make it cool. And I see Leslie like, no, like, we got this. We'll make it beautiful. But you get my drift, right? All I'm saying is capitalism as an economic system is fundamentally unsustainable. It's going to end. But I'm going to go one step deeper and tell you capitalism has some inherent internal contradictions that Marxists and anarchists and others have been pointing to, but they were tensions and internal contradictions that had not become so contradictory yet. But they are happening within our lifetime. And here's one of them. Capitalism, because it depends upon and needs completely unlimited growth, it needs new markets. New markets for both selling of goods and services, and new markets for more labor to exploit. But I got news for you. I was in the anybody with me in Seattle in November 1999? You were there? What was happening in Seattle of November 1999?
People were complaining.
The World Trade Organization protests, right? Teamsters and Turtles together at last. Me and 50,000 of my friends showed up at the meeting of the World Trade Organization, and we said, not today, you're not happening. And we took over the streets, and we literally shut down that thing. Nobody could move anything. And I'm going to tell you something really quick, y'all. I have often chanted this. I bet you have too. Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Here's the thing. In Seattle, November 1999 was maybe the first time I chanted that, and I was chanting with other people, and I looked around, and I was like, oh my God, it is our streets. We fucking have it. And there was a woman dancing with diaphanous wings up at the top, and there were puppets all over, and it was our streets, and we had it, and we were sharing it together, and it was beautiful, and it was empowering. And I promise you, if you ever feel that way, you will want to feel that way again. I feel like I got a little bit of actual liberty as a human being in that moment. I felt like what it was like, and I was like, I will never be domesticated again. I may not be able to be completely wild, but now I'm feral. Right? I am struggling constantly to get back to the feeling that I think that I deserve. So capitalism as an economic system I say that beautiful story because we won the Battle of Seattle and we lost the war of globalization. Because in the 1990s, when we were fighting for another world, and I will never forget both Margaret Thatcher and then later Ronald Reagan saying, "There is no alternative." Y'all remember that phrase? You have to get on board of neoliberalism because there is no alternative. In fact, she said it, Margaret Thatcher said it so often that it became the acronym, TINA. There is no alternative. Sisters and brothers and other family members of some other gender that I don't know how to describe, let me tell you this. I say to Tina, ta-ta. There are thousands of alternatives. There are so many other ways. So I am going to embrace one no, many yeses. A hat tip to the Zapatistas and to the writings of Subcomandante Marcos, who actually helped me to understand that. Creating a world in which many worlds fit. Right? It's such a beautiful way, and it gets you out of the linear Western mindset and actually thinking about, no, like, there's lots of different ways to actually do this, and we shouldn't actually, like, my way is not the right way, and believe me, that's a struggle for me, right? I know that I have to actually do that. So here's the thing. Capitalism is going to come to an end because the market, we lost the global fight. They have already swept over the entire world. The last thing that I want to say about capitalism is it's going to end because even for the capitalist, it is no longer going to work. Because see, if I'm the capitalist of 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it was to my benefit to Tamara to work. Why? Because I extract the surplus value of her labor when she's working at my factory. I'll put James to work. Do you know why? To extract the surplus value of his labor and claim it as my profit. I'm going to put Sarah to work. Can anybody guess why I put Sarah to work? To extract the surplus value of her labor. The point is, under that old model, it actually benefited the capitalist to put as many people to work as possible. I was only competing against other capitalists. The market, so to speak. But here is the thing. Let's anchor this. Between robotics, technology, automation, the capitalist does not need nor can profit from the worker and labor the way they once did. And I say that as both a very chilling observation, but also, I hope, an invitation to imagine this. If we actually democratically controlled technology and robotics, we can and should be living in paradise. There is enough to go around. There's enough for everybody to have rich, meaningful lives. There's enough for everybody to have enough clean food to eat, enough to have health care for all. There is not a single thing of the human needs that could not actually now be provided for everyone. But it cannot be provided if you allow the vast accumulation of wealth, power, and decision-making under capitalism. So I had a couple of people tell me that our collective naming of Artists Dismantling Capitalism was too provocative. It was too much. And you know what I said? I'm glad it's provocative. I want to provoke people. I am going to stand on the ground of saying we actually need a completely new economic system. And I'll engage and grapple with people who may not agree with that, and I will do it kindly and lovingly. But I am convinced, no, capitalism actually cannot be reformed. I think that we need to restructure it. But I might be wrong. And at Cooperation Humboldt, we say we will work with anybody who wants to work on specific things that will make people's lives better. So you don't have to agree with me on that big picture stuff, and I will invite you to try to change my worldview if you will allow me to try to change your worldview. The last thing I want to touch on is white supremacy, because we cannot have a conversation about domination and power, especially in this country, without touching on and acknowledging white supremacy, because that is objective reality. Pop quiz. What country or what place was whiteness first described and implemented?
Probably here.
Say it louder. Somebody. The United States. Literally, the U.S. created the concept of whiteness. See, under imperialism, there was always the other, but the other was based merely on culture or space. whiteness specifically was created in this country. And do you know why? This is like, and if you don't know the story of Bacon's Rebellion, I'm going to ask you to spend a little time researching Bacon's Rebellion, because here's actually what happened. There were Europeans with pigment like mine, right, that were rich and powerful, and they were exploiting and oppressing other Europeans who had pigment like mine, but they were doing it based on class. And then they came to this country and they slaughtered the indigenous people who were here and who were not even considered humans. And they began to create an imperial structure and society based on that we now know as the United States of America. And here's the interesting thing. So enslaved Africans and white indentured servants actually realized the boot is on our neck. The king or the royalty, the aristocrats are the ones who are actually in charge. But there are so many more of us than there are of them. Let's work together. There was an uprising, and they almost took over the area, like a revolution that almost won, Bacon's Rebellion. And enslaved Africans and white indentured servants found common ground amongst their class, because they were a class of people exploited, and they went after it. And here's what happened. The white European aristocrats said, oh, we can't let that ever happen again. So we will create different categories. And we will call some people white. So the indentured servants and the enslaved blacks were more or less on the same point up to that point. But then they began, and look it up. This is, as a lawyer, I can tell you, they literally began to create privileges, legal privileges. So the idea of white privilege is actually codified in the 1600s in this country to say, we're going to raise up folks with pigment that look like mine above the enslaved Africans. Question, do you think that they took those indentured servants and raised them all the way up to the same level of the aristocrats? Of course not. Hell no. In fact, I like to tell people who have white pride or think something about whiteness, that they think that they have some sort of solidarity amongst pigment. Why don't you go to the country club and knock on the door and say, hey, I ain't got no money, but I am white. Can I come swim in the pool and see how they treat you? Make no mistake about it. The wealthy, the ruling elite that do in fact have the pigment like mine, they see nothing in me other than contempt. I have white skin privilege because of the existence of white supremacy, because they elevated my ancestors and people like me, the Irish and the Scots, got to be a little bit higher, right? Or I should also say the other English people who were indentured servants, right? Make no mistake about it, many of the English... Right. So at the end of the day, all I'm saying is white supremacy based on pigment is the same part of all of this. So my effort to ground us as we talk about artists dismantling capitalism, we could also be talking about artists dismantling patriarchy, artists dismantling imperialism, artists dismantling white supremacy, artists dismantling capitalism. We're starting with capitalism because that's the economic system, and at Cooperation Humboldt, we believe that we can have a new system. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. I feel so privileged.